Okay, new beginnings. I think New Year's is probably one of my favorite holidays for what it represents. I have said before that every holiday has a spiritual principle. It illustrates a spiritual principle. And we don't always think of it in that way. We might think of a holiday as a religious holiday or a secular holiday, or just, celebrating the birth of a nation or something of that nature, which all of them do. But there's always a spiritual principle involved in every holiday, and it's I think it's important to tap into that. That's kind of what we do here, is remind all of us of what that is. We just went through the Christmas thing, and there are actually several principles that are illustrated there, which we have covered pretty thoroughly over the last several weeks. But the idea of New Year, of course, is a new beginning. And the spiritual principle is not necessarily a new beginning, the idea that, I can wash away the past and I have a new opportunity to start all over. It is that, and that's a good way to look at it from one level. But what it really, the spiritual principle that we're looking at here is one that there is only one moment, and that is the now moment. And I've talked quite a bit about this over the years, which is kind of ironic that I would say that over the years when there's only the now moment. But we forget, and it's real easy to forget, because where is our mind? Where's our thinking? Where's our emotion? It is rarely in this now moment. We're rarely here. We are always projecting. We're always, mulling over something that happened in the past. If we are upset emotionally right now, it's probably not because of something that's going on at this moment. It's something that maybe somebody said some time back, maybe just a few moments, maybe an hour, maybe a year, maybe a lifetime, maybe a whole, a decade or whatever. We're having an experience, we're having a mental and emotional experience, but what is that based on? Is it based on our living here in this now moment? And I would say probably, I think it'd be safe to say that at this now moment, all of our problems are solved. Everyone in this room has no problem. Anybody agree with that? You probably think that sounds pretty crazy, but if you had a problem, you'd probably be having a heart attack at the moment, or you'd have something going on right now that would not allow you to sit in a seat peacefully. So we can actually say that all of our problems at this moment are gone. Now you'll say, well, I'm late on my mortgage and that's bothering me right now. Well, it is probably, in that we're not saying let's not deal with mortgages and stuff like that. But the spiritual principle is, it deals at the soul level. The soul has never known a problem because the soul is indestructible. And that's a difficult thing to grasp, because the body is destructible. The body ages. The body has houses that it must live in and pay mortgages and wear clothing and eat food and all that stuff that's around it. So that's where we are living most of the time, is around the concerns of the body. So what we want to look at this new year is not that we're going to have a better year where we solve all the body's problems, but that we bring ourselves into this now moment. When we feel overwhelmed by all of these things that we're thinking about, that we remember that I am a spiritual being living in a body, and yes, my body has needs, but that's not me. And so that realization doesn't make those things go away. But what it does do is bring you into a point of strength, bring you into a point of power. You reestablish yourself in your center of power. So how would you rather deal with a problem in life? Would you rather deal with it from a place of peace and power, or would you rather deal with it from a frantic, I've got to solve this thing or I'm gone, kind of place, where most of us do? That's why we get so emotionally upset. and so mentally upset. So because something we think important is going to be taken away or destroyed or altered in some way. But the soul just kind of sits back there and smiles at this, because what could you take from the soul? What can anybody in this world take from the soul? And of course we can imagine things, but the soul itself is indestructible. It is eternal. We are eternal. So we're not talking about just blowing things off and taking an impractical approach. We're talking about remembering who and what we are at the deepest level. And that elevated view, that remembrance, Jesus talked about in the Last Supper, do this in remembrance of me. It's like take on the life, the wine, the blood, and the substance, the bread, the life and the substance of the soul. Remember who you are. Do this in remembrance of me, the soul. Remember who you are. And then deal with your problem. And again, this is not all about, it's not about being impractical and pretending like things are not going south when they are. It's accepting that for what it is. But also, the spiritual principle involved says, this too shall pass. This has come to pass. The line in The Sound of Music, when a door closes, a window opens, or whatever it is, a window opens, door closes. Something happens. When an end occurs, a beginning occurs. There's no difference. We lament the end. We lament losing, coming to the end, because it's the familiar. And the new is not familiar, so we don't know what's out there. And so we're trying to project and figure out all this stuff. And so we want to cling to the way things were. And we can do that to a point, but we find that the closer we get to the end of whatever we're in, the more willing we become to let go and look at it, from a new perspective, from a place of power. But the point here is that as we're going through this process, that's a natural process. There is death and birth happen on the material level all the time. Death and birth in relationships, death and birth in bodies, death and birth in just events. We'll all experience death and birth. We probably have done it many times. We do it literally in a daily life. If you go out someplace, you go shopping, you're born as a shopper. You enter a new life. You enter a life there, and you live that life for a limited bit of time. But it's a life. That's where you're living. That's where your life takes place. And you check out, and you die to that situation. That's kind of a surface example, but we go through this all the time. As I've asked the question before, where did the 5-year-old that you once were, where did they go? Where did that person go? And it's a constant, we're constantly moving on, moving through things, but it's the constant that we want to pay attention to. It's that eye that has moved through it all. It's like Emerson talked about, the string that runs through all the many-colored beads. That's what we are. That's the real of us. It's that part of us that's always said, I am 5, I am 60, I am living in Grand Junction, I'm living somewhere else, I'm this, I'm that. It's always the I, that center of knowing, attaching something to it. And so we often get confused with the attachment and say, that's coming to an end, that's changing, so I therefore must be fearful. And so what we're saying here, the principle of the new year, is pull yourself back into this center of power. I am a spiritual being going through many changes. I sometimes look at myself in the mirror and I say, I'm almost 65 years old. When did that happen? It happened one moment at a time. But there's a part of me that doesn't feel like I'm 65. In fact, when I think about when I was like 12 or so, And I would see a 65-year-old man. I think, that old geezer, I mean, what is that? And now I'm the old geezer. And I'm not as old as some of you people, so don't laugh too loud. But where does that come from? But my soul, I mean, I look in the mirror, and that's what reminds me. And Charles Fillmore talked about this, the co-founder of Unity. He said he was going to stop looking in the mirror and stop looking at photographs because he knew that there was a young man in there someplace. And every time he looked in the mirror or saw a photograph, it reminded him that of this big lie. And it really is a big lie. If I say I'm nearly 65 years old, coming up, I've got several months left, but if I say that, what am I talking about? Am I talking about this body, or am I talking about the soul? Actually, neither is true. I pointed out that your stomach is brand new every 4 days. So your stomach's not 65. And the body actually does. They say, the whole thing changes in 7 years, or remakes itself or is it 3 years? What is that? 7 years? So we're actually all 7 years old? How cool is that? So why do we feel 65? It's because we get out of our center of power. And so that's the principle that we're looking at here. We're not looking back 12 months and forward 12 months necessarily, but that's, that's part of our body experience. So we do that. That's okay to do. We're not just, throwing all the baby out with the bathwater. But life unfolds in cycles, and we're thinking of the surface here, not the soul. The surface level unfolds in cycles. There are times when things seem to be falling apart, and other times when they are falling in place. Have you noticed that? It seems like there are times you can do no wrong. It just, everything works. And, you get good news and about some issue that you've been working on a long time, and then you get more good news about some other thing, and it just seems like the good all comes at once. But like in about 2 weeks, it seems like it all blows up. It all goes the other way. And it rains in torrents. Just when one thing breaks around the house, 10 things break around the house. It just kind of a strange thing. So we could say, and again, Emerson talked about this. He said, don't get too elated, when your political candidate wins, or you get a raise in rents. People pay more. You get some good news comes along. He says, don't get too hyped up by that. He says the midworld is the best. And what he's talking about here is that the soul level, that place in us, where though life does seem to move in cycles, I think what we do is we want things to go good all the time, right? I do. I assume you do too. And so how do we think we're going to make that happen? We get into this spiritual thing, we get into attitudes, we get into all the positive thinking and all the affirmations and stuff we talk about, and we get to the place, or maybe we start at the place where we think, if I can just master my mind, if I can just think positive all the time, if I can just keep myself at that positive level, then I will never have, or I will have a reduced level of stress in my outer life. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. I used to think it would, and I thought that's what soul evolution was all about. That the further down the soul road I would go, the higher, the more elevated I became in consciousness, the more my life would stop falling apart, stop going through cycles, and there would just be a good cycle. Things good would happen all the time. What I have since discovered, though, is that's not what it's talking about. That's not what we're trying to achieve. We're not doing the spiritual thing so we can control the world. We're doing the spiritual thing so we can be in the world, but not of it. And what's that mean? It means that when the world goes through this cyclic, these shifts, when things start falling apart, we're in that, it's happening around us, it's part of our experience, but we're not reacting to it. We're not being pulled down to the negative level that that represents to us. So we're in the world, but we're not of it, meaning we're not drawing our emotional experience from what's happening there. But even to get to that point, that's quite an accomplishment, and it's one that you'll actually have a chance to practice that about 50 times today, if not 1,000 times. That we're always being pulled down, the temptation to be pulled down, because we're looking at the events in our life, and we're having certain emotions or thoughts saying our life is good or life is bad. Or I wonder what I did. I wonder, where my thinking went wrong or brought this about. So we need to get off that treadmill, because it doesn't lead anyplace. It's the hamster running on that wheel. You've probably seen them do that. And it doesn't matter how fast they run, doesn't matter how far they go, they still get off in the same place. And that's kind of what we do when we try to fix our world through changing our thinking. You change the way you relate to it. You change the way you experience it. You don't change the world. That's not the goal. If that's your goal, you are going to be a spiritual failure, because you'll never change the world by changing your thinking, by thinking positive about it. And in the video series I do, it's like standing by a river and thinking that all my, I could change the course of this river. I could slow it down, or I could speed it up by the way I think. Life is a flow, and that's not what our thinking does. What our thinking does, it determines how we experience that flow. So it doesn't change the nature of the universe. We've got to stop saying there's something wrong with this universe, because there's not. It's perfect. If it wasn't perfect, we wouldn't be here. You look at Mars, for example. You think that is a perfect place to be? Compare that to Earth. Of the two, which would you rather live in? I like to look at Mars, but from a distance. I don't want to go there. I think going there is kind of a waste of time, actually. I think sending robots up there is great, because it's fascinating. When those things, the rovers, go over the surface of Mars and send back these pictures, it looks like Grand Junction. We don't need to go to Mars. Just go up on the Book Cliffs. You're there. But what's also there is air. You can breathe, and it's not 500 degrees below zero. Well, it's close, but it's not quite there yet. But that's what we're not here to change the world. We're here to live our life in this world, to be in this world, but not of it, to not be determined, have our thoughts and emotions determined by it. So we're often confronted with the classical question, is the glass half full or half empty? And that's always a good New Year topic, as we kind of evaluate where we've been and where we think we're going and all of that stuff. But there's another way to look at this. Your answer is determined by how you feel at the moment you're viewing the glass. If you feel optimistic, the cup will be half full. If you feel weak and vulnerable, the cup or glass will appear to be half empty. And that's a very important observation. When I was doing quite a bit of recording, music recording at home and stuff, I would have people around the house listen to stuff I had done or tried musically, and I could always tell when they liked it or didn't. There's a vibe that's set up. And I was able to pick that up, and it was nothing, no great power I have. It's just a sense of, you can tell when somebody likes something. Maybe you have one of those ugly sweaters on, and you ask somebody if they like it, and they say, oh, it's beautiful, and they're lying. But there's just some way you know that. And there's I don't know what that has to do with what I'm talking about here. Let's see here. Your answer is determined by how you feel at the moment. It's you look at a thing, and it's not the thing that makes that decision for you. There's something in you. There's a consciousness that is setting up the tone. You're looking at this glass, is it half full or half empty? The answer is, it depends on how you feel. It depends on you. That's what I'm trying to say. Depends on where you're coming from. So when I would ask somebody musically, do you like this or not? It wouldn't matter what they said, really. Do I like it? Does this feel right to me? And then I'll pursue it. That's the thing that if you do what everybody likes, then you'll do what's already been done, probably because everybody's seen it and everybody likes it. No true artist that breaks onto the scene, very few are liked at first. Remember the whole Van Gogh story? I think he sold, one painting for just almost nothing. And his paintings today sell for millions and millions of dollars. He was doing something nobody else was doing. He was being himself. He didn't know how to do anything else. And that there was no market for that at that time. And that's the sad thing about being a genius of any kind. I think Jesus was a spiritual genius. Nobody got it. The people I think around him, maybe a few of them got it. But he stepped into a preconception, a world that was framed in preconceptions. This Messiah is going to come, and here's how he should behave. And so there was a whole group of people looking at him. Well, he's not behaving like he's supposed to. That's not how the Messiah behaves. The Messiah should follow the law, at least, if he's a good Jew. And Jesus was, eating, doing things on the Sabbath and doing things that were against the laws that were governing them. So he couldn't have, and he was threatening the whole religious industry. If you believe what he was teaching, as I think he did, the kingdom of God is within you, that means the church should help you along with this, but that's not your source. If God is within you, then you don't need a church as a way to get back to God. God is within you. I was told this week that my great nephew, I think he's my great nephew. What's your cousin's kid? Great nephew? Something like that. Anyway, he went to a church service, or candlelighting or something, and the minister had said that Jesus died for your sins, and that caught his attention. Apparently, he went home and asked his parents, why would Jesus die for my sins? What sins? And I think it's a very good question. And I would answer that what you're hearing there, what that minister said, is a religious perception. It's a matrix of theology that may or may not have anything to do with the truth. My personal opinion is it has nothing to do with the truth. Jesus didn't come to die for our sins. He died basically because people didn't like him. He was put to death because he was a threat to a certain culture that did not want to have their apple cart upset. So what the Christian community did is they gave that whole meaningless death a meaning. And they said, here's why he died. It was all pre-planned. They don't want to look like God made him mistakes or anything. And they took the old Jewish sacrifice idea that, Jesus sacrificed. He's the last sacrifice that we're going to need. No more animals are needed. He's the last one. And if you just believe that he died for your sins, if you accept him as your personal Savior, you'll be ushered back into the kingdom when the time comes. So, that's a very complicated answer. It's a very complicated question, but it's not complicated when you realize that all we're talking about here is a religious matrix that is built around certain ideas. Are they based in truth? Probably not. And I think you could say this about all the world religions, because when you think about the individual is an expression of God, where would the connection be? Do you have to go to church to get that connection? Do you have to read the Bible to get that connection? Do you have to be dunked in water, sprinkled with oil to get that connection? Do you have to take the sacraments? Do you have to drink grape juice and bread, eat crackers to get that oneness, to get that relationship? And the answer is no, you don't. All of these things in their proper place remind us, as the New Year and all the holidays remind us, of a spiritual principle. And that principle is oneness. Nobody died for my sins. My sins are nothing. It's absolutely nothing. Have not changed the character or nature of my soul. it is totally irrelevant. But somebody has come along and learned how to make money off of that. They've learned how to get power from that kind of teaching, and the success of that message lies in keeping people ignorant. And that's why the Bible, they say it's all in the Bible. Well, you start reading the Bible, it's like reading a physics book. If you're not a physicist, it makes no sense. It's very complicated. Oh, well, I'll interpret it for you. So here's how you think about this. And that's how the whole business runs. It runs on ignorance, keeping people ignorant. But that is not true, and we know it's not true because something in each one of us keeps rising up and saying, you are one with God, and there's a reason that you are feeling separate from God. And that reason is determined by how you feel about this whole thing. What most of us are doing in our spiritual quest is sorting through stuff that is given to us. It's not true. And we're trying to confirm that it's not true. We know it's not true on a not intellectual, but what's the other, intuitive level. On the intuitive level, we know it's not true. I've told that story many times. When I first discovered unity, I knew it was what I was reading was true. I just didn't know how to prove it or how to say it in a way that made sense because I didn't have the tools to do that. And I've been actually struggling to do that for 40 years at the pulpit and in books. Because you can't put into words this inner knowing, this knowledge that I am one with God and I can never be separate from that. So that's what we're doing here is the new year is about learning to trust yourself also. It's learning to trust what you know is true at the deepest level. The condition of the glass need not determine how you feel. Determine how you feel, and the condition of the cup will take care of itself. This describes our relationship to formal religion. If you've bought into this idea that I was born a sinner, I'm a miserable sinner. I was born, worm of the dust. I'm lucky to be here. Then you're going to gravitate toward a teaching that says all you have to do is accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, and you'll be okay. That's pretty good news to a worm of the dust. Here's a way out. Or if I just feel miserable, if I feel like I'm worthless, have a very low self-image, and I show up at a place where everybody throws their arms around me and says, it doesn't matter who you are, what you think of yourself, we love you anyway. There's a real appeal to that. It doesn't mean, though, that you're going to get in touch with that deeper reality of yourself, that you're going to get past that worm of the dust consciousness. So that is personal work. It's like I've said before, religion can take you up to the bank of the river, but you've got to swim across. You're the one that swims across. Nobody can take you across. And to get across is to come to that realization that I am now an expression of God. But religion will take you up to this point, and then they'll say, when you die, you can go across the river. That's how you get there. There's some truth to that, I think the near-death research and all that shows that dropping this body, we're going to have an incredible experience. But that's not what we live for. If we live for that, why would we come here? Why would we choose to have this experience? It'd be a waste if that's, if this means nothing and that means everything. You can get into that with the near-death research. You can get into that with religion. Religion says this is just a test for the big show, It'll determine whether or not you get there. Is that what this is all about? Is that all it's about? I don't think so. So the condition of the glass need not determine how you feel. Your condition, the condition of your life, that's what we're talking about. We don't look at that and say, how should I feel? Well, let's check it out here. And start going through things about why I should feel like a worm of the dust. If you don't feel sufficiently like a worm of the dust, go to church And they will remind you, in so many ways. Like, how could this little boy, why should he even have to come up with a question like that? What sins? It's just it's a thing that and I'm glad he's asking that question. And I don't know if anybody would be glad that I wasn't around to hear it so I could respond to him, because that would might be considered sacrilegious. I don't know, but I have no use for that kind of thinking. I've reached the point a long time ago in my life where Jesus didn't have to die for my sins. That's not what his life was about. I think he was a spiritual genius that was simply trying to tell people this religious stuff is closing your mind. There's a better way. And that way you will find, as you go into that inner closet and shut the door and pray to the Father who's in secret, because the Father who's in secret will reward you with direct inspiration. That I that you are comes to the surface, and you know that you are an eternal being. And this glass thing, whether it's half full or half empty, doesn't matter. We do everything we can on this planet to make it good, to make it, make ourselves productive. I like what Myrtle Fillmore said. It's not enough to be good. You've got to be good for something. And I think that's the glass thing, it's the earth thing. So an encouraging word or phrase can suddenly inspire you to a new way of seeing. And this demonstrates the consciousness factor. What I'm saying here is, if you can pick up a book and read a line and it can change your mind and you can see the glass differently as the result of that, where's the problem? If you can change as the result of being inspired by someone else's words, then the problem is not the glass. That's what it's saying. So you're bringing your power back. I have the power to see from my center of strength, from my center of power. And the reason I feel terrified at this moment is because I'm not there. So the solution is not to, try to get your glass filled up necessarily, but to be able to look at that glass and not be moved by if it's half full or half empty. That's not what determines our level of experience. So do not get discouraged in your emotionally low moments, and I say that knowing that that's it's very difficult. What is a emotionally low moment is a discouraging moment. But in those moments, don't forget that that's not you. And whatever's happening in your life is not happening because of you necessarily. What's happening because of you is I'm agreeing to feel bad because this is happening. And is that where I'm limited? Is that the only thing I can experience? No, it's not. So you refuse to set your course by these brief seasons of low visioning. And that's really the genesis of low self-esteem is, maybe somebody tells you you're worthless, not worth anything or whatever at some point in your life, and you buy into that. It's some authority that tells you that. I've told you I had a woman that came in one time and had lost a baby, just days after it was born. And a priest told her that it wouldn't have made it to heaven because it hadn't been properly, whatever you call it, baptized or whatever. And for all these years, this woman, just lived with this horror that this baby that, she loved would not be held in the everlasting arms of God. What an image, that would be to overcome. And so we talked about that for quite a while. And I don't think I really convinced her, but I think I got her thinking that baby's fine. And you didn't do anything wrong. And, it's just, you're okay. But years of holding that from a religious authority, it just made me angry to think that somebody would do that to another human being. And somebody in that position. And that's the beef I have with traditional religion. There's a lot of good in it, but there's a lot of things that stunt our spiritual growth that we need to be able to sort out. And I can see why people are fleeing from that stuff. But it is, and I'm not advocating that we drop it all, because we all do what we do where we're at, you know, in our level of understanding. But I, in my own life, on my own journey, can see so much of that as superstition that is worth nothing, has no value to me whatsoever. And I know people will hear this that don't like it and think it's sacrilegious or think whatever. And that's why they're not here, actually. If in the twinkling of an eye, everything can change because you allow yourself to change the way you see, and you probably have had that experience where things look really bad, and again, you pick up a book, you read something, somebody says something, maybe right now it's happening. Something changes and your life looks differently. You know, the half-empty cup suddenly becomes a half-full cup. It's because you're not focused on the cup. You're focused on, you pull yourself back to your center of power. That's what this whole thing is about. Each new moment is a potential new beginning. It doesn't matter how negative you've been, even 1 moment ago. And you think that's not hard to get rid of, but we drag our emotions. I had a negative emotion, so we dragged that around. That was a bad thing for me to do, so I'm going to punish myself for at least 15 minutes. You don't have to do that. And I know the difficulty of not doing it, but it has nothing to do with the reality of your center of power, your soul. Nothing at all. You can start now to set a new energy in motion, and that's what we want to do. Refuse to be the victim of circumstance. Life is dynamic, even the tiniest glimmer of hope, and declare, life is dynamic. There is every reason to hold to even the tiniest glimmer of hope and declare that the good you desire is now coming forth. We stand at the threshold of a new year. See it as not only half full, but brimming with possibilities of unimagined opportunity, because that's what we are as spiritual beings. We're eternal beings. We're on this particular place on our path, having this particular experience. But never forget that. Try to bring your thought back to that center of power all the time. All right? I won't see you till next year, probably, even if you come to the Wednesday class. So that's going to all happen. So it's great to see you, and we've had an interesting 2018, and I know it's going to be a great 2019.